What's up, nigga?
You're watching Fugitive Red Eye, and welcome to another rant/random thoughts. That's right, another random thoughts. And I thought I'd go with a cool title like Corbin did in his latest rant. So this is one I've been meaning to talk about for a while, and this is probably going to end up being a longer episode, but we'll see. And I'm probably not going to do very much editing to it. But I wanted to talk about political fatigue. And me just kind of being tired of dealing with a lot of that bullshit. Now, you may think, oh, does this mean you're not going to talk about politics? Oh, does this mean that you're going to stop following it? No, not at all. Not at all. It does mean I'm less invested in some of the aspects that I was, and I am a lot more cynical than I was on certain things. And there is a lot of things that are much more frustrating and draining when it comes to it. So I definitely don't follow it as much, right? Like, I used to watch, 5 to 6 hours of, news and podcast stuff to kind of keep up with current events a day. I haven't done that in a while now. Really, the height of my political interest was 2020, I think, in a lot of ways, but even after that, I was still really into it. Obviously, I've been interested in politics since 2012, but with various different, and really more 2011, actually, but with different degrees of it, right? The first time I ever voted was in 2020. First time I ever registered to vote. And that was a whole big thing, because prior to that I didn't believe in voting. And there's still a part of me that really doesn't in a lot of ways. Because there are a lot of problems with, the concept of the two-party system, right? And the concept of third parties and things like that. And obviously I've gone through multiple different phases throughout my life of where I stood politically, right? Growing up, as I've done a whole overview of the evolution of my views, so I'm not going to go too in-depth on that, because that'd just be, ridiculously long, and I've already done videos on that. But, for instance, when I was really young, I was kind of a generic Republican, because I was raised Republican, right? And I was raised in an LDS family, so a lot of my views were very tied to what my parents believed and stuff like that. And there are still a lot of those values there, but I didn't really give it any critical thought when I was younger. And then, in around 2011, I started getting into conspiracy theories. That made me question everything, made me a lot more skeptical on things. Also made me very open-minded on a lot of different things. And then, ironically, took me down this weird socialist phase that I went through up until around 2016, when I started to get more red-pilled. And then, after that, I went through a whole sort of, concept of trying to come to terms with what I actually thought. And, things in college, anti-fucking male and anti-white rhetoric, definitely pushed me a lot more right-wing. And, then, eventually, I would vote for Trump in 2020, and again in 24. And I am still very right-wing. I'm even more right-wing now than I was back then, because, there was also the Rio video that radicalized me a lot more, and realized I had to be harsher on certain things. Again, it's all stories I've told before, so I'm not going to go too in-depth on that. You guys have seen my other videos if you keep up with the shit I talk about on here. But, in the run for 2024, obviously there was a lot of hype moments leading up to it, thinking, for the Trump win and stuff, right? But come 2025, he gets into office, and early on in his term, there's a lot of things I like, right? Like some of the ICE stuff, and, what he did release of the JFK stuff. I know it still wasn't like everything, but there was actually some interesting stuff that implicated, Israel and the CIA both in it, which I wouldn't have expected anything with that to get released. So there's a reason that for a while I thought that Trump was legitimate, right? That I thought that he was genuine. And I do still think, and you could argue this as a cope, I do think he was at one point. But I think something absolutely happened that made him 180 on so many things lately. For instance, I really started to get disillusioned with the bombing of Iran, right? And it wasn't the first time he'd done something like that, right? He did strike Syria, and he had beef with Iran in his first term as well. And there was all sorts of World War III talk and shit back then, too. And I don't know that I agree with, the concept of it starting World War III and shit like that. If anything, I feel like that kind of rhetoric saying that we're going to get to World War III could potentially be, a concept to try and get us to sort of normalize that idea to actually get it to happen. Now, again, I don't know. I don't really know. The state of the world is very conflicting and not very promising at the moment, and it is really fucking hard to stay positive. But another thing, after the bombing of Iran, I was like, you know, pushing back, saying, oh, I hate this, I hate this. And then you start to notice he's given Israel, like, everything they want. Like, every president does to a degree, but Trump's like, when he said he wasn't, when he said he was going to be the most pro-Israel president, he wasn't fucking kidding. He's bending over further than any other president has for fucking Netanyahu. My stance on foreign policy is we should not be so involved with any foreign nation, right? Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, Russia, I don't care about any of that. That shouldn't be any of our concern. But unfortunately, a lot of these globalist types make it our concern, and it fucking shouldn't be. And so that was really disheartening. And then there was the Epstein stuff, you know, the fact that he ran on exposing this, the fact that he ran on saying, yeah, we're going to get all this out there, we're going to go after all these people, we're going to, you know, solve all these problems. And then all of a sudden, he's like, nothing to see here, folks, there's no list, there's no clients, none of that, it's all just a big hoax made by the Democrats. It's like, you pushed this, you ran on this, what are you talking about? No, guys, he totally just killed himself, don't worry about it, nothing else, nothing to see here, folks, move along. And at that point, it was like, what the hell's going on? So at that point is when I start to think, you know, did he get threatened? Did he get blackmailed? Did he get bribed? What happened, right? And that's the part that's frustrating, is not knowing what happened. And I talked about this on Corbyn's video, too, right? But then he's like, yeah, we're going to give money to Ukraine again. And now his administration also prevented them from pulling fluoride out of the water. And it's like, how many more things are you going to go back on? So at this point, I don't consider myself a Trump supporter. I still consider myself MAGA, right? I like the concept of, you know, making America great again and what it stood for. But the problem is I don't think Trump's the guy. And I've talked about this on videos before. But it's really disheartening and really fatiguing. And, you know, it's funny, because political fatigue, like getting tired of politics, is sort of what led me to be interested in politics in a lot of ways, right? Seeing all the fucking gay and trans and, you know, race stuff pushed by leftist media, and how much of that was going on, right? And that's what even got me to spark in the first place. And I'm still tired of seeing that shit. And I'm still fucking tired of, like, all this, because, like, people think that, you know, the culture is shifting, and I do think the culture is shifting, but I also think that there could be an element of theater to that, too, right? Like, it's just throwing us red meat to placate us and make us think that everything's improving, when, realistically, these are small victories in a larger battle. And, like, look, I like the small victories. I'll take the small victories. But there are a lot of things that are really frustrating. And it's really frustrating to see people just, you know, blindly accepting, oh, yeah, you see, like, especially when you see people who are like, you know, trust the plan, that kind of thing. And so it is really frustrating to see that, you know, culture, art, and politics still just being decayed. Like, there is some resurgence of some of the older stuff, but a lot of the time, like I said in my South Park review, right? Everyone who thinks that just because you can say retard and faggot again thinks that shit's all back to normal, that's a very small and surface level thing, and it's really frustrating that people act like that is like the metric, right? Because we're getting all these people pressing back against quote-unquote anti-Semitism, and, you know, it's particularly Republicans like to push back on this and like go after people's speech. Like, for instance, you know, there's those college students that get deported for the Palestine stuff, and it's like, look, I voted for, you know, deportation. I'm against immigration, both legal and illegal, right? But if your reasoning is anti-Semitism, I think you're doing it for the wrong reason, right? Like, you're doing it for the interests of a foreign government, and that's really frustrating. And, you know, like, DeSantis himself, like, was passing, a few years back, was trying to pass, like, laws against anti-Semitism and shit like that in Florida. And you see that with Republicans growing across the nation. And then you get things like, you know, like the AI age verification shit and the whole, oh, think of the children, which, again, it's just an excuse to get everybody's personal information on every site they are. Like, they already tried to do that with porn sites, which is why, you know, Pornhub pulled out of Utah, for instance, and a few other states. Even though, you know, Xvideos and other sites are still up here just fine, and haven't changed a fucking thing. The concept of, like, making it so that social media has to have you, like, dox yourself to them in order to use it is a scary concept. And you don't have to do that in the U.S. as of yet, right? But there are people trying to pass laws for that, and they're all fucking Republicans. And so it's really frustrating to see, you know, the censorship being pushed by the left with things like offensive content, race, and things like that. But then to see the same thing with Republicans supposedly going after anti-Semitism. And it's funny that anti-Semitism gets its own special word. Like, you know, everything else, it's just, you know, racism or stuff like that. Like, I guess Islamophobia has its own word. Although, ironically, I think that that's normalized a lot on the right. And, like, here's the thing. I don't like Islam. I don't like, you know, Muslim immigration to, you know, Western countries. I think there's a really big problem with it with rape gangs and stuff like that in Europe. But it is funny that Republicans will only focus on the Muslims and act like they're this huge fucking threat, when realistically they're just a bunch of fucking, like, people living off in the desert fucking half a world away. Like, granted, the ones that are here, that's a problem. Sure, I can agree with that. But even then, like, there's also a lot of, like, normal Muslim people. Like, there are, like, the thing is, to go so hard at Islam, it's, like, the safe thing to do on the right, right? And it's funny, because there was actually a neocon I was arguing with online when the Iran thing happened, who said he was terrified of Muslims and said that that was like a normal thing. Whereas I think that, you know, when you talk about Israel or Judaism, then suddenly they act like, oh, well, you're so hateful. It's like, you people think that, like, bombing the fuck out of the Middle East, as long as they're Muslim, is okay. Like, that's fucking crazy just how bloodthirsty Republicans are in that aspect. And it's fucking nuts. And, you know, on the left, they you know, they go after Christianity and stuff like that. So, you know, both sides largely avoid, you know, one particular religion, but love going after the other two Abrahamic religions. Very interesting. Although, in fairness, I will say the one thing I'll give leftists is they're much more likely to criticize Israel than, like, a boomer con. But yeah, you see all that, and I get really tired of it. You know, it's really disheartening to see a guy who claimed to be anti-establishment basically just be a part of it. And again, I've kind of covered this in, like, the South Park review and stuff like that, right? And in Corbyn's video. And again, a lot of the problem I also do run into is a lot of people on the right don't actually hold traditional values. You know, there's a difference between conservatism and traditionalism. And the problem with conservatism is it doesn't actually seek to conserve anything real or tangible. What it seeks to conserve is the status quo, right? The current value, right? Like, that's why, you know, there's the old saying, you know, Republicans or Democrats driving the speed limit. And there's also just so much fucking shit flooding the airwaves, right? All this information. And it makes it hard to actually try and come to something objective or true. And that's also part of the point of the propaganda, right? Like, you know, there's a quote from Obama himself where he basically said something to the effect of, you know, the most effective form of propaganda isn't making someone believe it's true. It's you flood the conversation with so many different ideas that it becomes impossible to tell it's true because there's just so much misinformation out there, right? And there's so many different conflicting things. And it's frustrating, too, because, like, you know, the older I get, the more I find that a lot of shit you're taught in school is absolute bullshit. You know, like, Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, you actually look into these guys, they were fucking terrible. The whole civil rights movement was basically a way to spread socialism and stuff like that. So there's a lot of problems with these false things that were taught in school, and it's really frustrating. And, you know, there's other ones that even if you question, you could get in trouble on YouTube. So there's a lot of shit out there that's, you know, really convenient that, you know, it's like Norm Macdonald said, right? You know, it says in the history books that the good guys won all the wars. I mean, what are the odds? And you get all this stuff like, you know, this guy's a Fed. So, you know, like Nick Fuentes calling Tucker Carlson a Fed. Tucker Carlson calling Nick Fuentes a Fed. And the thing is, both of them have points against the other being Feds. But, like, it's like, like, all this talk of Feds is like, who's a Fed, who isn't a Fed? It's really frustrating because you can't really trust anyone. And I do think that there is a point to be made that you can't trust people, you trust ideas, right? And let me be clear, I'm talking about when it comes to information. Because, obviously, I do think a culture is people, right? Like, the concept of America being an idea is fucking cringe and gay. I do like the ideas America stands for, but, you know, there is a culture and people that are Americans, and they like to try and muddy the waters as to what that means, too. But, you know, back in the day when I was really into conspiracy theories, you know, I would go under the impression that it's all theater, right? All of the battles and, like, politicians running against each other, it's all the same side, just playing theater to give the illusion of choice. And I thought that for the longest time. And it was only with Trump that I thought maybe there's a chance this guy's genuine. And, you know, I'm starting to think that it is possible that everything with him is theater too, right? Like, maybe the reason the media went so hard against him was to convince the hardcore conspiracy theorists and people like myself that actually he is against the machine. Because, look, they're all going against him. So it's like, is that all theater? Like, again, I still hold out the cope that I think at one point he was genuine, but it's totally possible that that's all by design, that I ever thought that in the first place, right? That it was an intentionally crafted narrative to make him seem like the underdog, to go and actually make people think that, you know, there might be a chance of beating the machine, when actually you're just continuing to fuel it. I mean, do think about the fact that all of the politicians and all of the fucking celebrities loved him before he ran for president. Like, you know, a lot of people, like, a lot of the thought was, oh, maybe that 180 was because he's actually pushing back against them and their machine now, but it's like, or is it because it's all an act? Like, it's gotten to the point where I question everything about the guy now. Like, even, you know, the attempt on his life when they shot him in the ear, it's like, there's a part of me that's like, I wouldn't be surprised if that was fucking stage 2 to make, you know, Christians think, oh, see, he was saved by God. God protected him. Again, I'm not necessarily saying that that's the case, that it was staged or anything like that, but at the same time, I wouldn't fucking be surprised at this point. Like, everything is just crazy to gloss over, and now he's, like, saying, like, Operation Warp Speed was great, which, granted, was the thing he pushed in his first term that I ultimately very much hated. Because Operation Warp Speed was the thing that, you know, expedited the speed of the quote-unquote vaccine for COVID, which itself isn't even really a vaccine. It's literally just a thing that prevented you from getting the symptoms. It didn't prevent you from catching or spreading it, which is why it's retarded when people would act like, oh, yeah, if you don't get it, you're selfish because you're spreading it. It's like, it doesn't prevent the spread. And that's information they all knew. But no, they pretend that it did. But it also took away any legal liability that was on the fucking pharmaceutical companies that made this shit. Like, it was easily, like, one of the worst things he did in his first term. And it's like, look, I loved the great economy we had in his first term. I liked a lot of the things he stood for and he ran on. But at a certain point, it gets to the point where it's like, was that all just red meat to placate us? And I know I use that term a lot, right? Were they just throwing something at us, throwing a nigga a bone to make us feel like we're actually getting something, we're actually making progress, to kind of shut us up, right? Is that the point? Is it all theater? And that's the part that's really frustrating and tiresome with this whole thing. And, you know, the term politically homeless, I think, is a pretty apt term to describe how a lot of us are feeling right now, too. Because, you know, I have plenty of friends and people who have all sorts of different ideologies, both on the right and on the left, although mostly on the right. I'm not going to pretend that I have, like, a huge cadre of friends on the left, but I have a couple. But for the most part, you know, I have, like, traditional conservatives, right? Like, Christian conservatives and shit like that. And there's things like them where, like, for instance, some of them will just say, you know, oh, trust the plan and stuff like that. Some of them will lean into that almost sort of Q mentality, which I think is unhealthy and bad, because then you just think Trump's always in the right no matter what he does. And it was really a shame to see people like John Doyle buying into that bullshit. Or I see, you know, I have friends that are like, you know, white nationalist types. And I have my own disagreements with them, too, because a lot of them, like, will think that, like, again, I agree with them on several points, on several things. But, you know, I don't necessarily agree with all of the solutions. And I run into problems with, you know, they only care about immigration if it's non-Europeans. I personally think immigration of Europeans wouldn't be good either. Like, again, I have a more strong stance against immigration than my white nationalist friends do, so... And sometimes talking to them, it does get very one issue, and it's like, fair, I get it. I know that a lot of the problems are caused by a lot of the same groups and things at the core. I get that. And I agree with them on some of the things like statistics and things like that, right? But the problem is it's very absolutist, and also, like, again, there's a lot of things that I feel like could easily be, like, planned with, like, staging and shit like that with making people think certain things, too. So it's like, at the end of the day, I don't fucking know what I would call my ideology, because I do, you know, agree with them on a lot of things, but I've also got a lot of hardcore libertarian views. I've got, you know, friends that are, like, libertarian ANCAP types, too, and I agree with them on a lot of things, and my ideal, you know, pipe dream society would be something akin to that. But at the same time, we gotta be realistic and realize we don't live in that pipe dream, right? We live in the real world. But at the same time, I also don't like a lot of the authoritarian shit that, you know, like a lot of white nationalists want as well. So it's like a whole thing of, like, trying to figure out a balance and what I believe, and it's really fucking difficult and frustrating and tiring because there's all these people saying all these points. Brent, I love hearing different perspectives. I love getting all these different points. But, you know, there's a reason I stopped really arguing with people online a few years back, because I used to love getting into arguments and debates, because, you know, I like thinking, you know, I'm open-minded, marketplace of ideas, argue good points against bad points, that kind of thing. But then you come to realize most people are largely set in their ways, and that doesn't mean people can't change. I mean, hell, I myself, as I said in this video, have changed multiple times throughout my life, and even just in the last few years, I've become much more and more radicalized and extreme on certain issues, too. And it's look, for me, there's a lot of issues at the core, right? There's the system, right? There's the globalists, and there's the other things you could say about them that could get you in trouble for these new stupid anti-Semitism laws, right? Like, granted, like, again, a lot of these, like, concepts and things, people pushing back and policies and shit to try and silence that only gives it validation. And, you know, there is something to be said about the demographic behind it, because, again, I think it was a lot of the same families and a lot of the same problems. But then at the same time, I run to the issue of, you know, when you talk to, like, white nationalists talking about a lot of these issues, which, again, they do get to the core of a lot of these issues on some things. The problem is that race becomes the only issue to them, and I think race is a factor in people, and I think we've become too afraid as a society to talk about it in any meaningful way. Like, it's all surface-level privilege shit with normies and stuff like that, right? I think that there is something to be said about it, but I also get frustrated when I talk to people where they act like that's the only factor and it's the only issue. And you know, a lot of people who are white nationalists are also simps when I think that, you know, women are a lot of the problem, too. And the removal of gender roles, gender norms, and the lack of accountability for women societally, and the fact that men have become weak. And even when they do acknowledge it, a lot of them don't have, like, standards for women. They have standards for men, and that's the thing that's really frustrating with conservatives. They'll be like, you need to be a true man who's husband-worthy, and they'll have this whole list of criteria. But the second a man has any fucking standards for a woman, they're sexist. And again, this is mostly like boomer cons and stuff like this that I hear it on, but I hear it from a lot of people, and I still see simping from basically everyone on the right, except for, like, you know, like the MGTOW, red pill, manosphere types, which I agree with on a lot of fucking things, too. So, I mean, at the end of the day, there are a lot of different, you know, issues that I, you know, have different philosophies and stuff that I agree with. And it becomes hard to know exactly what the right solution is, and that's the problem, too, is I think trying to find solutions is probably the most frustrating part. Because at the end of the day, you know, there aren't a lot of simple answers on some things, and then the things that do have simple answers, you'll get a lot of pushback trying to implement it. Because, you know, there are a lot of grays out there, but there are some things that are absolutely black and white as well. And I don't mean that in a racial sense, I mean that in an absolutist sense. There are some things that are objective in that, right? And I, again, do think that morality is in very many ways objective. It's just our perceptions are flawed and subjective, so it becomes hard to narrow down, you know, some of the minutiae of some of the more, like, harder to figure out issues. So yeah, I'm getting pretty worn out of it. Like, you know, when I see in my Discord feed, and it's just Chisu saying, on Backdoor Blue Sky, and telling me some shit that some stupid leftist said on Blue Sky, I'm like, I don't care. Or, like, I'll see, you know, like, a post about, you know, this or that political thing going on, like, oh, this congressman said this, oh, Trump said this. Like, I see all this shit, and I'm just like, I find it hard to continue to care because of how cynical and jaded I've become on everything. And I do care, and I do keep up, and there are certain things that I do get more invested in than others, but it is getting increasingly difficult. And I think that's by design, too, because, again, part of the goal of the they trademark is, you know, like, you know, demoralization, right? Whatever you want to call them, Illuminati, globalists, the Jews, whatever you want to call them, there is a certain degree of demoralization that's planned out for the masses, and it's really frustrating because, you know, it is effective in some regards. And, you know, the one thing that could be hopeful is there is the concept of, you know, if they were winning, the propaganda wouldn't be necessary, right? If they were in control, the propaganda wouldn't be necessary. That's a quote I heard from Michael Malice. I don't think he actually coined it, but it is a good quote, and he's the one who I attribute it to because he's the one I heard it from. I can't remember who actually said it. Ironically, at the time of this recording, I'm not particularly gloomy about it, because there are some days when recording this probably would have been more heated or more, like, upset. Right now, I'm actually in a relatively good mood, so I'm just voicing the opinions themselves. But, you know, in general in society, there's goalposts that have shifted. Like, one of the problems I have, and this will be kind of the final point I think I end on, is the concept that people think that, you know, the times they are a-changin', right? The concept of, oh, get with the times, oh, change is good. I have a very massive problem with the concept of change for the sake of change being perceived as a good innately, because change is a net neutral by default, right? I think a lot of change is actually bad, but I think just changing for change's sake is retarded because there's not an end goal. Like, the concept of quote-unquote progress often isn't actually progress, it's just different. So, people think shaking up the status quo is somehow good. And I'm not saying that I'm necessarily a fan of the status quo. Like I said, I think we actually need to revert several things back to the way they used to be, because there are certain things that are in our nature. And as humans, we do have different natures based on, you know, race, nationality, sex, upbringing, environment, education, things like that. There's multiple different factors that make us individuals. And that's another thing, is I am a lot more individualistic than a lot of people who are, you know, the more white nationalist types. Although I am also someone who does think that, you know, your makeup, both genetically and environmentally, I do think are also part of what make you you. I don't think anyone is made in a vacuum. There's no such thing as someone who's 100% individualistic. We're all products of the people we grow up around, of what our makeup is, and the experiences we go through. But at the same time, it's tough because there's no absolute on it. There is a degree of nurture and nature in all of us, right? But as I said, the concept of change just for the sake of change, it's just a retarded fallacy, and I have a lot of problems with it. But yeah, I'm getting kind of rambly here. I hope this was as entertaining as I intended it to be. Like I said, there were many other times I wanted to record this, but either was too tired, was doing something else, or I was at work, or whatever. There's plenty of other times I could have recorded this and been a lot more heated and frustrated and angry. So I hope this was sufficient with the way it is, and I hope you guys enjoyed. Have a good one. Toodles.
You take forever to say nothing.
Subscribe to Fugitive Red Eye.